Mr. President. Welcome to Georgetown. It's wonderful to have you here. Joel Hellman, the Dean of the School of Foreign Service. This is Dangerous.
Mr. President, Jeff Henderson, very nice to meet you.
Prematurely regal. And our 100th anniversary is coming up next year.
From the Georgian Embassy and from Georgia, including Ambassador Baraja, President of Georgia. A graduate of Tbilisi State University, Infrastructure and Equipment. In 2013,
this is the place that I'm very happy to be and I'm honored to be. Many of my friends studied here, some of them taught here, and I heard lots of very important stories about your university, and it's a great privilege to be here and to interact with your faculty and students, and greetings to all of you, to my friends that I see in the audience, and I'll try to be to be brief on my opening remarks, to give more time to questions and answers. I guess that's the more fun part. I mean, you can you can hear about my political views there. Why are we here, and what are we doing? If anyone, I mean, probably you know about Georgia. It's a small state that is in a very important region, which we were trying to name just before we entered this room, which is what is the exact name of the region, but it's the region that is located between Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. And the Georgia is really a connection, a bridge in this very important region, because it's a region, it has become a region of a major communications between Asian markets and European markets, and the opportunities that are in Caspian Sea basin, the energy opportunities, as well as, we could say, as a place and a meeting place for different cultures, for different societies, and also a very important place because it's an ex-Soviet republic that has very clearly declared its pro-Western orientation, and actually, who follows Georgian case, has been punished for this orientation, for this ambition of freedom several times by our northern and very powerful neighbor, by the Russian Federation. So here is Georgia for the last 26 years, building its statehood, building its identity, and building its path to Europe and Euro-Atlantic unions, very clearly declaring where we want to be and what we believe we should be doing as Georgians. In a way, this is a continuation of something that our ancestors did. We are a nation with at least 2,300 years of statehood history. And what our culture was dedicated to, and what our beliefs were dedicated to, was to orient ourselves from this oriental environment where we were pretty comfortably well and we communicate with our neighbors, but to locate and identify ourselves onto the Western path and Western identity. And it is amazing that we made this choice some 16 centuries ago. 16 centuries ago, we became Christian. And it is different being Christian in the middle of the Europe at that time, and it is different being Christian in that part of the world about which I am talking about. It was a choice of identity. It was a choice of geopolitical orientation. Of course, it was a choice of faith, but at the same time, this faith at that moment, basically, I would say, meant the same as NATO or EU, because it was orientation of a state to a group of other states which were developing west of us. And not only we made this choice, but we were able to maintain and sustain this choice through all those centuries, through a very tough environments. dealing with big empires and dealing with big stakes that those empires, sometimes empires conflicting in the region. We sustained our identity, an identity that has its own script, has its own language, has its own culture, and a strong identity that stands very firm today, not taking into consideration that we are 20% of our territory is occupied, and is occupied by a very strong neighbor. So what are we doing now here today in DC, or what we have been doing like a week ago in Brussels? We try to enhance this path. We try to work together with our partners, together with our friends, to convince them to be more active on Georgian case, to convince them that they should put even more effort to open the doors wide, which are widely open for Georgia, but it is not, it's not a sufficient language. They should let us in also into these doors, to NATO and to European Union. And United States is a very important part of this story, because United States was always an active player when it came to deciding cases of giving the nations that have put freedom, that have put their free choice, that have declared their democratic orientation. It was US really who usually led, or basically led, the support to nations like this and gave them opportunity of free passage to a much freer areas or unions like we are launching for we're trying to get today, be it NATO or being it the European Union. So this is a working process to organize friends, to concentrate friends, and to convince friends that we have to be having very good relationships. We have to be more active on the agenda. There's one thing, I mean, I heard that your School of Foreign Studies has a centennial anniversary. Well, we also have a very important centennial anniversary this year, and this is also something that I have to just briefly touch, is that it's 100 years that Georgia has, 100 years ago we established our first republic, and this was a republic that was established after the collapse of the Tsar Empire, and we recreated our statehood once more. Many times we did this in our history, but once more we recreated our state. And the state was a very contemporary European democracy with a great constitution, a constitution that gave, let's say, equal voting rights to any citizens. And we're talking about 1920s. At that time, equal voting rights to men and women, no death penalty, equal rights for detention and rights and all the details related to that. So what we are celebrating this year is once more very important for me, is the centennial anniversary of our first republic, which existed only for 3 years, but have shown what our orientation was, even in these 3 years, which have shown what our identity is and where our values are. And now our newly regained independence goes for the 26th year, 27th, I guess, this year. And once again, we are very outspoken on what we want, where we plan, and what our ambitions are.
Thinking about the European Union's approach to Georgia and countries in the region, with the best of intentions, the European Union launched its Eastern Partnership program many years ago, and I think it's fair to say that some critics would actually lay some of the blame for tensions with Russia on a rather inept foreign policy that Europe carried out in that region. Obviously, you're on the receiving end of this policy, and it's brought, I assume, benefits to Georgia, but would you have liked to see a somewhat different approach from Europe to Georgia, Ukraine, and these other countries? Would it have changed anything, do you think, compared to today's situation?
Different in what respect?
Well, for example, the carrot of membership was put out there very early on when it seemed as though there was really no prospect for accession for any of these countries, and that may have led to inflated expectations in these countries, which had both internal implications but also may have provoked Russia. I don't subscribe to this view, but it's certainly one hears it. Well, I'm just trying to get your
I'm happy
reaction.
you don't subscribe to that view because I'm gonna be very outspoken about that view, which is following. The first occupation of Georgia did not happen in 2008. And let's first describe this view. So this view basically says we have to be very cautious with Russia. We should not step on something that they call their backyard. That all we, the nations that believe in rule of law and good governance and goodwill, and that are having our floor in UN, all we believe those are independent nations. But Russia believes these nations are their backyard. So we should respect how Russians think about Georgians, how Russians think about Ukrainians, how Russians think about Moldovans or Balts, and we should stay away from something that they are calling their backyard. And if we do something in that area, if we respect the choice of the people living in that area, if we respect the right of the choice of the countries in that area, we are going to cause the problems. This is the theory. And the equation that proves this theory, allegedly, is the 2008 Bucharest summit, where Georgia was promised to become the NATO member, and the 2008 August war, where Russia entered and occupied parts of Georgia. So if you take that part, it's like looking at the soap opera and talking about the scene number 515, you know, and not looking at the previous story. Well, the news is that Georgia was occupied much earlier. That Georgia was, someone who studies Georgia knows that the occupation of those two regions of Georgia through something that we are today calling a hybrid war, and that Russia was exercising in the 90s, happened in the beginning of 90s. It happened in 91, 92, 93. At that point, there was no talk about NATO. At that point, there didn't exist anything like Eastern Partnership. But Russia still did this. Georgia was not going to become, Georgia was not given neither a promise, neither Georgians applied to NATO at that point. So what Russians did, they reacted not to the promises that they were given to Ukraine or to Georgia or Ukraine. In Ukrainian case, they say this is when they joined signed the association agreement. They responded to Georgian dedication to their independence and peace and freedom. This was the main factor that annoyed Russians in the 90s. They enacted the same mechanism. This is what annoyed them in Georgia in 2008, and they brought their troops. This is what annoyed them in Moldova in also 90s. This is what annoyed them in Ukraine in 14. So that theory basically has looks at the separate cases and doesn't look at the situation at large. And the situation at large is following. Russia has declared to itself and to the international community that they have privileged rights. Privileged rights on the nations that have lived long before, or it doesn't even matter, that have their independent identity. And if we sign under this theory, or if we in some instance accept the fact that one nation could declare about another that they have the privileged rights, then we are basically undermining the whole world stability and the whole world order. the whole convention of living in one society and living in peace. So what we should be doing is trying to be sincere with Russians, actually being as sincere as they are, because they are very outspoken in their political messaging, and tell them, we are not going to accept your view of the world. We have the basic principles, the principles that have been laid out by humankind after committing terrible things, after having 2 world wars, after having terrible atrocities. The humankind came to decisions, and those decisions have to be respected at any part of the globe. And there is the right of nations to determine its identity and not to be anyone's backyard.